told you about my younger brother's strange experience at school. He went to the same school as I did, but he was a few years younger than me. So we never shared the same house or year, and I was in seniors when he was in juniors, and I'd already left the scout trip when he joined it. And it was on a scout trip that it happened. I remember for years later, he'd wake up from nightmares whispering, 3 women, and a man, and a boy, and a boy. It was only when he was a lot later that we once shared a glass of port and a cigar, and he told me what happened. Now I knew about Stanley Judkins, horrible piece of work. He was going out to be the school bully, and us seniors sometimes had to take a lesson to him and teach him not to be so nasty to the smaller boys. He was a horror, forever using magnifying glasses to set his fellow scouts' trousers alight, and that sort of thing. Or coughing when others were doing exercises rescuing people from drowning to put people off. A little horror. An oik, we would have called him in my day. And I knew that he had disappeared, left the school, and nobody had quite explained it. Until my brother Arthur told me that evening. You see, he said, it was like this. Do you remember at school I was rather overweight? Yes, I do seem to remember that. And my voice broke late. And we all called you Pipsqueak. Yes. Well, I think that was why I was always paired with Judkins. Because as long as he had to have me following after him, he couldn't do very much. And as he was my senior sixer, I had to follow him. I remember he was always telling me to off, but he never could because the scoutmaster would look at him. And the other person who was always with us was Hamish. Do you remember Hamish? McHamish? Scott's lad. Yes, that's the one. Well, you see, about him was, he was just as big as Judkins and had a sense of honour, did Hamish. So Judkins wouldn't be so beastly around him. Indeed, he was always suggesting that we did beastly things, but Hamish wasn't going to do that. So I suppose we were there to contain him, but it meant that we often missed out. Because if you were lighting a fire, you wouldn't let Judkins do it for fear he would set light to the wood. Or if you were boiling a kettle, for fear he would accidentally spill it on his fellow scouts, you wouldn't let him do it. No, I suppose you wouldn't. But what has this got to do with anything? Well, we were camping. It was that long, hot summer we had as children. Do you remember? Yes, I spent it sailing with the Sea Scouts. And you went camping in the New Forest, didn't you? Yes, we did. It was the second day, and while the rest of the troop were building fires and learning how to make them using only glass, we, of course, weren't allowed to do that. No. So we were off to find water. And we climbed up top of a hill to see if we could see springs around, because it was a very dry land, high up. And Hamish had a theory that the springs should all happen at the same level, where the clay, he said, came out from underneath the chalk. So we were looking for that, and Judkins was laughing at him for listening to the geographer. When suddenly Judkins said, "Look, over there, there's a well. I do believe there's a well. Shall we go there?" And I held up the map and I said, "No, we can't go there. We can't. It's in red. It's out of bounds. We're not allowed there." Do you remember? The scoutmaster was most particular that we had to stay where we were allowed to be. "Pah! Poppycock!" said Judkins. They only said that because they wanted to make sure we had to get water from further away. I bet they've got something down in that forest. I'm going to go down there. But just at that moment, an old shepherd came up. And I asked him, Sir, can we go and get water from that well? And the old man looked at us, long and hard, and he said, You been up from round here, did they? And I said, No. And Hamish told them who we were and where we came from. And he smiled and he said, Well, don't you go to that well. Don't you go to that well. Not if you value your life and liberty. And Judkins laughed and said, Ha! What have you got? Still there? No, I tell thee. Many a year ago, 3 women and a man were hung in that forest for what they did to the children. They were real bad uns, they were. And so it were that they were hung there in that forest where they had committed their outrages. And before they were hung, the priest, he excommunicated them by bell and book and candle and cursed their souls. And by the power that still lies in the trees, that some say is older than the new faith, their bodies still wander, looking. What are they looking for? You're still? No, they're looking for blood, for souls that are like them. What rubbish! I can see it, it's just an empty wood. You wouldn't say that if you were here of an evening. On a winter's evening, you can hear them all calling for blood. Well, don't you go there. Oh, look, is that your scoutmaster? And sure enough, the scoutmaster, who always kept an eye on Judkins, was coming up. And he rounded on us and told us, quite frankly, what he thought of scouts who couldn't find water. And that was it for that day. It was the next day. It was a very hot day, I remember. And we were swimming when suddenly the scoutmaster turned round and said, Where's Judkins? And Hamish looked, and he saw that Judkins' Stanley's towel had not been used at all. He knew that night Stanley had been talking about going to the still, as he called it, in the wood. Tried to persuade him to go with them. But Hamish had said no, we weren't allowed. And obviously I was asleep and snoring when the discussion happened. I always used to do that for fear of Judkins. And the scoutmaster said, Come, show me. And so we led the scoutmaster up to the top of a high hill, the one we had stood with the shepherd, and we pointed to the wood. And we saw in the wood, breaking into it, from our side carefully, there was Judkins. He was creeping in scout fashion. I didn't think he had it in him. Nice to know he picked up something. Pity it's so badly used, said the scoutmaster, and started to trot down to the wood to give Judkins a piece of his mind. Well, the wood was about a mile away, maybe a little less, because we could see clearly, but we were on the top of the hill and it was down in the valley. And we could see in the centre of the wood there was a well. It seemed clearer today than it had yesterday. And Judkins was clearly making his way to the centre, carefully, bent double. What is it, old chap? That's what we saw. I saw coming on the path, bent double, towards him, a figure, man or woman, a mile away, I couldn't tell. But I wasn't ever sure it was alive. There was something missing, some spark of warmth that radiates out from a living soul. And it was coming towards Judkins. Now he was making his way carefully. And I looked, and I saw somebody else was coming from behind him now. And he was clearly creeped out, because because he made his way down a little side passage to avoid both of them. Just then the scoutmaster looked likely to rescue him because he called out, "Watch out!" You could hear it. His voice was so loud. And Judkins almost turned to have a look. But just then, at the edge of the field, standing in the way of the scoutmaster, another figure rose. This was certainly a woman. Her hair was long. Her skull was white under the sun. And she gestured, and you could feel the gesture was like a command. I and Hamish hit the ground and stayed there, only daring to peep up. It was like a warning, like a threat. And the scoutmaster had turned aside. He was running now to try and get into the wood some other way. But the woman turned and turned and turned and sung her song of dread at him. And then I saw Judkins was nearly at the well. He was just about to get his cup when suddenly, out from the woods there stepped a figure, taller than the rest, dark, short-cropped hair. It was unmistakably the man. And then there was a sound, like a scream. And suddenly from the well, it seemed, a summer haze filled the wood. The scoutmaster came back up the hill, exhausted, and we all sat and looked at the forest. Well, the shepherd, who must have heard something, came up, and we explained what had happened, and he said, "I warned thee." And he looked at the scoutmaster and said, "How could you be so stupid? Let's get another one of the lads and bring him down." And so he got a fellow, and the 3 men went into the forest. Afterwards I heard what they found. Right by the well, Judkins' body was hanging. Quite dead, I suppose. Oh, more than that. With not a drop of blood in it. They buried him as a Christian. But his soul stayed there. I once went back quite close, and I asked about the wood, and they said, as if it had always been, that no one went in there for fear of 3 women, a man, and worst of all, a boy. That was what used to keep me afraid at night, he would say to me. I hope that you never meet such ghosts in your life. And I took his word as counsel. I have never looked for ghosts, even when they have come to find me. I advise you to do the same.